Hello, welcome back to the Tonic podcast. I'm your host, Drew. We're joined by my friend and co-host, Alex. Both of us are political professionals, and we're here to talk about politics and global events. And this one's going to be a little bit different. I know that we are literally a week away from the presidential election in the United States. We do have some thoughts on that later. We're going to talk about some of the Senate races and stuff. But for now, we wanted to touch on something that was a little bit different and a little bit under the radar. So, in fact, two oil ships are currently spilling in the ocean, one in South America and one in the Mauritius region in the Indian Ocean. And I noticed that this got a little bit of coverage, maybe for a day, but it hasn't really been talked about. And I thought that was interesting. We're going to talk about why that is, and there's plenty of reasons. But for those that you don't know, two oil ships are currently sinking. The one off the coast of Venezuela is currently holding over 1 million barrels of crude oil, and then there's another one off of Mauritius, and that is also seeping oil into an ecological area right off that island that people are frustrated. So it's causing it's turning a little bit of heads. It's interesting that they're both Japanese-owned vessels. That are now in the hands of others and are both slowly sinking oil into the ocean. For something that got a ton of coverage, like the BP oil spill, it's interesting to see this get kind of the opposite, kind of flown under the radar. So let's dive right in. Alex, what are your initial thoughts on the actual story itself, and as well as the media coverage surrounding it?
Yeah, so later on, I would like to talk about Japan specifically because I think there's a direct correlation for why these events are happening right now and why Japan is involved in both of them. But just my initial thoughts are that I think there's just a glaring double standard around the world that kind of involves how first world countries work with developing countries. And like people wonder why a lot of countries, especially in Africa, like Mauritius and all these other countries, like why are they hesitant to trust rich nations? And I think the governing bodies as well, like the United Nations and all these other groups, because these countries time and time again have kind of got boned, to be completely honest. And like to me, and especially in this African coast problem, there's just a glaring double standard, that seems to say that we don't really care about this issue if it happens far away from our view. And it's interesting because in a time of climate change and a time of kind of a backlash against oil and the whole oil industry, we're still seeing the IMO and the United Nations, which run the IMO, kind of just turning a blind eye to something that is quite significant for nature in general. And I saw a great quote, I think it was out of The Guardian, where they said the events in Mauritius appear to be something that would be more appropriately featured in a John Grisham novel like Pelican Brief, where it's just neglect and corruption that screws over people who we've turned a blind eye on. So that's what I take away. Like I know a little bit less about the Venezuela issue than the one in Africa, but both of them to me just seem like we don't know what to do with these spills. And we need to I think we need to have a global effort to maybe revolutionize this, because Joe Biden's talked about shipping and the environmental impact of shipping, but why aren't we talking about spills like this?
Yeah, and why is there not like a coordinated response? I think that's the thing that I'm noticing is, we like to think that if something really goes wrong, we all kind of get up together and fix it. But I think maybe we used to think that before COVID, because now we've seen plenty of times when there's something that affects the whole world. It doesn't necessarily mean people come together and try and fix it. The one that in Mauritius, it's been a few months now that they've cordoned off whole zones of this island that are deemed, you can't go in, whole lagoons that you just can't go in. There's been testing on the food, and they say, I'm reading here on Forbes, seafood from this region has now been deemed unfit for human consumption following laboratory tests because of the spill over time. Who's really affected the most, right? Like, okay, so for me on this side, I see that seafood, like, oh man, I guess I can't buy my sushi from that area anymore. But we have to remember that there's tens of thousands of people that rely on fishing for a living in this area that are, as well as tourism and vacationing, and that is now going to be threatened by this spill. Same thing in Venezuela, right? The Venezuela one, it's also it's off the coast of Venezuela near Trinidad and Tobago, right? So Trinidadians? I don't know how to
Yeah, I
say.
don't know about that one. I
But
don't know.
people from Trinidad and Tobago are concerned and upset because, this isn't their tanker. This isn't even their oil. This is a Venezuelan tanker that is tilting in the Gulf slowly. And Venezuela's not really taking any responsibility for it. And Trinidad and Tobago is like, hey, man, like this shouldn't even be our problem. And now we're the ones having to figure out what's going on and push and pull at people to try and get a solution. So let's dive a little bit. Like you said, I think we're on the reverse. I know more about the Venezuela issue, and I think you know more about the Africa issue. But the Venezuela issue is
Perfect.
is basically like, I'll try and keep this somewhat quick because Venezuela can get pretty deep. But basically, if you have listened to this stream, Venezuela is really in a tough spot right now. I mean, politically, almost at a revolutionary kind of state, economically, like devastated. And main part of their economy was oil and oil exports, which is oil right now is not at a great price and it's kind of in the tank. And then on top of that, all of that combined, the United States has placed very strict sanctions on who can do business with Venezuela. So this oil that's in this Japanese vessel that is owned in part by Venezuela, majority, and like a quarter owned by an Italian oil company, they own this Japanese vessel, the Nabarima. It was supposed to be dropped off, this 1 million plus barrels of crude, supposed to be dropped off somewhere, but it was blocked by U.S. sanctions because of, the U.S. believes that the Venezuelan government is acting as a bad actor and threatens human rights. So that's why this oil was kind of just like stuck out there. They didn't know what to do with it. It was supposed to be sold, but then the sanctions blocked that, and because the market for oil is so bad, they literally just couldn't sell it. So they had 1 million plus barrels sitting in this Gulf. And they moored the ship. I don't know if you can see here. They have these chains holding the ship down. So it's moored in a shallow gulf between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. Now, for a while, they just left it there because we don't know where to sell it. It's only when Trinidad and Tobago, people of that area, started to notice that it was tilting. It was like shifting to one side, right? It had to tilt. I want to play just a part of a quick video here. This is someone.
Please do.
This is someone from Trinidad and Tobago. He's part of a group. He says it in the beginning. I'll just hear it real quick.
My name is Gary Aboud. I'm the corporate secretary of Fishermen.
Yeah, I remember you showed me this video. It's pretty good.
Yeah, Gary Aboud, corporate secretary of Fishermen, a friend of the sea. It's basically, an environmental organization based out of Trinidad and Tobago. They go out to the Nabarima. This is 10 days ago.
5 degree tilt. It looks like it's held together with
Right.
the anchor chain.
The last update was an 8% tilt. Now it looks like more like a 25 degree tilt. Not
We know that the
degree.
vessel is full of crude oil.
So you can see right here. I mean, it is tilting. Obviously, one side is above the other.
Yeah, that's not looking good.
And he's
It's
upset.
not looking good.
Right, and he's upset that there's no international cooperation to do this. I even looked at one of Venezuela's and its Alba partners websites for news, Telesur English, but this is a Venezuela funded like multi-state like pro kind of like socialist nationalist Latin American kind of place. Basically they think, CNN and everything's fake news and this is the real news. Well, it hasn't even mentioned, I haven't found a single mention of the Nabarima. And let's see, even if I Google it, even if I use their search bar for the Nabarima, there's nothing to be found. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Huh. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so first I'm going to respond and then I'm going to get into the other side of the Eastern Africa problem. Yeah. And it's, I think that's really interesting because last week I, did a catching up on Cuba, right? And part of the issues that are coming up with Cuba actually is that Venezuela cut like a third of their oil that they give to Cuba, like last week, I think it was, or maybe 2 weeks ago now. And it kind of all makes sense now when I'm looking at what's happening in Venezuela and the fact that they're kind of having an oil crisis themselves. And then you mix in all these ramifications. To me, it seems like it's all connected, man. The world is all connected. It's crazy. But the second thing I was going to say is that it's really sad that it takes a fisherman on the shores of Trinidad and Tobago to realize something's bad, and there's no international effort. Like, after 9/11, the U.S. kind of bullied our allies into going to war with us, in a lot of these other crises. I mean, we can name a shit ton, I'm sure. Excuse my language. It seems like it's really easy to mobilize people when it affects rich countries. But
Notre Dame on fire, right? I mean, that people were, billionaires were coming out in droves to donate to fix the cathedral.
Right. But no one's talking about this, and it is sad because I forget what you said exactly, but it's significantly bigger than all the other spills that have happened in that area of the world and in the United States. And it's really sad. Okay, so that's my first part. And the second part is that the one on so Mauritius is on the eastern coast of Africa. It's an island. It's in the Indian Ocean. It's a great shipping network. It's in a great location. It's a big proponent of the Belt and Road Initiative from China. It's basically where most ships land in Africa, in that part of the world. So it's a huge shipping channel. The Portuguese and the Arabs used it back in the early days. It's always been a key part of trade. And so basically, in August, an area of the Coral Lagoon covering 125 square kilometers had been cordoned off. And this covers a length of coastline of about 36 kilometers. And this is after the government of Mauritius finally released a report that deemed fish dangerous to eat, like you mentioned earlier. But the big problem here is that it wasn't as much of a cover-up as almost like a intentional chaotic response by international people. And so basically this Japanese company, which, let me see, I have it here, the operator of the Wakashio, which is Mitsui OSK lines, they were the ones that were like ordering this ship. And as far as I'm concerned, they also were a joint Italian-Japanese company as well, which is sort of fascinating.
Yeah.
And basically this company, since this spill, which has completely boned this Mauritian fish market and network of, I mean, it's screwed up their economy, not just their fish market. There's a loss of tourism, fisheries alone are affected. But this Japanese company offered the government a refrigerated container that's valued at $125,000. That was they're like, we're going to give you $100,000 refrigerator in exchange for the problems that we caused here.
To keep all the fish that you can't eat safely.
Yeah, really, really, really nice. I know. And the Economist said that the actual cost of this is probably close to $500 million. Yeah. So, 100,000, $500 million. Okay, cool. And there's a lot of questions about this now because the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, which is run by the UN, they basically haven't had a unified statement about this, which is quite shocking. They've said nothing about it. And they've basically said that the oil isn't toxic. They've basically said that, let me see, I pulled this up somewhere. I can't find it. But basically what they said is that the oil is actually not that bad. That was the only thing that the IMO has actually said. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really find that great. There's a lot of questions that still need to be addressed, like how much oil was actually spilled. We don't know because the IMO is supposed to deal with this.
Right.
Second off, where did the ship even sink? We don't know that. How toxic is the oil? And then the dolphins. There's a protected breed of dolphins that died, and there's a lack of information from international bodies, so we don't know what's happening. So there's now protests going on in Mauritius because everyone's blaming the government. And rightfully so. The government probably could have done more, but we have to remember this is a tourism-based country. That it's tourism and fishing. And so this is where the IMO should be stepping in and actually helping them delegate this problem. And they haven't. But the bigger issue, and this is kind of the root of what I really want to talk about, at least with this Mauritius problem, is that Japan's been having a scandal. Let's see, Forbes, who I actually don't really like that much anymore, they become really clickbaity. They actually did a lot of really good journalism, I have to say, on this issue. And they have an article that's called, "Is Mauritius Oil Spill Disaster the First Victim of the Japanese Science Council Scandal?" And basically a background is that back in, I think it was August, Shinzo Abe resigned as the Prime Minister of Japan. And it was basically because of, well, a lot of reasons, but he's had a lot of environmental scandals and a lot of like cherry picking of the scientists that are put on this like historic council inside of Japan. And so the new prime minister, who is Suga, I'm probably gonna butcher that, so please don't be too rough. But Suga is pretty much anti-science, anti-climate change. And he basically, there's this historic body called the Japan Science Council. And he's basically appointed loyalists and people that don't believe in science. And this body was established in 1949. And, it followed lessons from the World War II. And it covered academic disciplines, social sciences, humanities, natural and life sciences. And a law was passed in 2004 to guarantee the independence of this science council. But Prime Minister Suga has denied 6 members who need to be appointed because they don't agree with his personal connections. And so he's not adopted the latest technologies, and Japan has actually been condemned by even the United States, who obviously we could both probably agree that they're not the epitome of good environmental change right now. But Japan has basically become a rogue actor in the world involving climate change. And obviously I'm giving a really Spark Notes version of this. There's a lot of small pieces here. But Japan actually, and this is something that no one really talks about, but Japan's slowly becoming kind of a nefarious actor. That's one of our allies. And I think that this oil spill shows that they were warned for a long time about some of these dealings, and they just instead said, screw it. And so Japan said that they also now are releasing the water from Fukushima back into the sea. So they have a plan by 2022. They want to release all the basically chemicals that were contained after Fukushima. And so Japan's actually becoming kind of a dangerous climate terrorist. And so it makes sense to me that Mauritius happened.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I didn't even know about all that like council stuff with the new prime minister of Japan. I mean, I certainly think that both of these are a stark reminder that these environmental disasters can happen anywhere, and I think that it's a reminder that how poorly we react to some of these problems. I mean, the Deepwater Horizon BP oil spill, right? Considered one of the worst in our history. This boat off the coast of Venezuela has about half the barrels of oil that released, right? So it's not like these are small. It's not like it's just a small ship or anything. Like these are, I mean, the one off Venezuela, millions of barrels, right? Tens of millions of gallons of oil waiting to be spilled if not handled properly. And that's what's so weird to me is like, by this point, we should now be very, very aware of how something small somewhere else, far off in a different part of the world, can blow up into something that affects you at home, right? Whether it be someone in China ate a bat, or a spill in Venezuela follows the current of the Gulf and goes into the Gulf of Mexico, and now you're in Louisiana, and your shrimp is contaminated because of something that happened in Venezuela, right? Or Fukushima, right? Fukushima had that was like a result of an earthquake or a storm, right? But on a nuclear plant. But I mean, again, it's like time and time again we have these problems where an environmental disaster happens somewhere and maybe really messes up that place locally, but over time that damage and that economic cost spills over into other countries, other industries. And I mean, we've had the biggest example of this with the pandemic. On a more health kind of way, in a more public health context. But again, it's like we should see these two things happening, and there should be developed nations running to help out, right? There should be multiple organizations gunning to help out. People were calling, Donald Trump should be on the phone with people. How do we fix this? How do we get this oil done? I don't want my fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico, those hardworking American fishermen, to feel the consequences of something Venezuela did. I mean, it's politically viable. I don't think anyone on any side of the aisle wants ducks being killed in oil. Like, I don't see why not. I don't see why we aren't so coordinated in solving problems like this, but we aren't. Now, these boats have been sinking for a while. Okay, we closed a couple lagoons on Mauritius. Or, okay, Venezuela says, the tilt isn't that bad. It'll be fine. We'll empty the barrels eventually. And there's really no sign that, I just read that a few days ago, a government official said that, oh, no, the tilt is gone. Don't worry. There's no tilt anymore. But you also can't go to the site. We're not letting you in the site, so you can't take any photos. And the crude will be fine. It's not dangerous. Don't worry. But don't go to the site. And it's like, what? Like, how do people not, I don't know. I don't know. It's to me it seems like such a win for the world, for like countries to come together and solve this together. But no one wants
Yeah.
to, no one wants to do that. I guess no one. It's too hard, or people are too involved in their own issues, which might be part of it.
Well, I mean, I have a theory on that, and I don't want to go too far into it because I would love to do another episode on kind of the international order in general and kind of maybe why it's cracking.
Yeah.
But like, so I was reading where it says that NGOs are critical of the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, because it's supposed to protect, greenhouse emissions, protecting spills, protecting the safety of shipping, but they're actually not included in the Paris Climate Accords, and also they're linked to a lot of oil lobbyists and big oil companies.
Of course they are, right?
So the IMO is not acting in the better. But so I'm listening to a book right now called Disunited Nations, and it talks about kind of how the post-Cold War, the U.S. really flourished during the Cold War and created kind of a post-World War II apparatus. There was kind of a bribe-based system, like we bribed people through the Marshall Plan and other things like that, to kind of join our side, especially after the fall of Nazi Germany and then the fall of the Soviet Union. It was enticing to pay these actors to be friends with the United States. And so when I see the IMF, the United Nations, groups like this, they're not actually helping small guys. They're not helping the little guy. They're basically U.S. benefactors or U.S. like international bodies. And that's my theory. Obviously, please tell me if I'm wrong, people out there, Drew. But I think that's the big problem, is that when there's small issues that no one seems to care about in terms of like stock markets and the economy, we don't talk about it because we've created an alternative to, imperial order. And that alternative is just finance. And no one cares if the finances stop in Mauritius or Venezuela.
The weight of the scales are tipped in favor of the very large and very connected shipping companies and shipping nations like Japan, right? They obviously, it's not a conspiracy. They obviously would do what they can to tip the scales of whatever, international law or responsibility in their favor. Whereas a poor or middle class Trinidad and Tobagan fisherman, he's on the other side of that scale. He probably doesn't have the resources, the political connections, even just the time of day and physical ability, if he's working so hard all the time, to solve a problem like this, right? And yet, we see these, Tobagan fishermen and the organizations that represent them. They're still trying their best to try and get some, accountability for something like what's going on with the Nabarima. But it would be ridiculous to think that the scales are even in someone like the 50,000 fishermen in a small Caribbean island and massive multinational corporations and massive institutional, like multinational institutions that govern this kind of thing. There's a huge imbalance in power, and that is one of the major things that I'm seeing with like the Nabarima off the coast of Venezuela. Obviously, Venezuela is super at fault. They don't seem like they care. They don't even mention it on their state news. And even Trinidad and Tobago is so limited in what it can do. And so it's like, and then again, like Japan, who made the Nabarima, they're not even here at the discussion. They're probably going to get off scot-free from this. Because, again, it's like they don't own it now. They just owned the ship at a time and sold it. I don't know. It's just crazy to see, and it's just crazy that there's two going on, right? There's literally two Japanese shipping vessels sinking in two different parts of the world, threatening the fishermen of two different islands. It's like, oh my gosh.
It's nuts.
Yeah, it's like, it's like, maybe this is a gross oversimplification, but I was always told, like, you can make mistakes. Mistakes are fine, but don't make the same mistake twice. And this is like we're making the same mistake twice at the same time.
Well, and I have to ask you, how many things you think have happened? Like, obviously, you and I are doing podcasts now. We're a year into it, but what do you? There's probably other ones out there, man.
Oh, yeah, there's probably stuff that gosh, I heard something about a Russian oil spill earlier this year in the Arctic. I'm sure how many of them aren't even reported, of like, maybe it's not as much as millions of gallons, but how many coal mines leak, how many, how much things do we not hear about or are underreported?
Well, yeah, and it comes back to just the consumer. Like, I'm no like dietitian or nutritionist, but I'm mainly a pescatarian. Like, I mainly only eat seafood, and Like they're starting to say seafood's worse than beef half the time now because of what's in our oceans. And like that's a ramification that I think the the rich world needs to really understand, is that the oceans are basically like the nervous system or the circulatory system of the world. Like we're all going to be affected by it, and we need to change that. So
yeah, this is not in a far corner of the world like we used to think of these things. Like this world is a lot smaller than we realize and interconnected. And if anything, this last full year has taught us that even more, maybe the hard way.
Sadly.
Well, that should wrap up this episode. I mean, we're certainly not maritime law experts, obviously. So, I'm not exactly sure what exactly the solution looks like to these issues, but it certainly looks to me like not enough is being done. The people that are mainly responsible are not being held accountable, and the victims are usually those that are have the scales tipped against them, let's say, on the world stage. So it's kind of sad and unfortunate. David Attenborough would not be proud. So let's, I guess, leave it at that. If you have any thoughts on this issue or anything you want to add about, regarding maritime law, oil spills, responsibility, stuff like that, anything related to geopolitics and maritime, we'd love to hear it. And let us know your comments. Again, you can find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, YouTube, Twitch, and a variety of other third-party sites. So thank you so much for listening, and take care.